I took the fall for my brother and spent 2 years in jail. But when I got out of jail, my brother and sister-in-law were worried that I would compete for the property and join my parents in trying to kick me out of the house, but they didn't know that inside the prison, I accidentally saved the daughter of the richest man in town. To show his gratitude, he gave me $100 million. After my release, the first thing I did was try to go home and surprise them. Just as I reached the door, I overheard my brother's wife, Greta Kessler, complaining, of all days, she had to get out today, making me skip my prenatal checkup just to rush and transfer the property. My mother replied, "It's for your own good. With her prison record, finding a job will be tough, and getting married will be even tougher. She might just end up staying here and fighting you for the house." Greta snorted, "Let her rent a place. I'm not living with an ex-con." Listening to their conversation felt like a punch to the gut. My heart ached. Wasn't my mom the one who used to call me her little sweetheart? Hadn't Greta always said she saw me as her own sister? How did everything change so suddenly? The door before me was the one I'd dreamt about for 2 long years. But now, standing in front of it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. After taking a moment to compose myself, I finally knocked. My mother, Melanie Kessler, opened the door, looking surprised. "Nina, you're back? I was just about to send your dad to pick you up." She gave me a once-over and forced a concerned look. "You've lost weight over these 2 years? It must have been tough." If only I hadn't overheard their conversation, if only her concern had been genuine, how wonderful that would be. I managed a bittersweet smile. "No worries. Taxis are convenient now." With that, I stepped inside. Greta immediately rushed over and sprayed me with alcohol until the bottle was empty. Only then did she look at me. "Don't take it the wrong way. I'm just cleansing you of bad luck." She told me not to overthink, but her disdain was written all over her face. I knew Greta despised me for being an ex-convict, but she must have forgotten. I went to prison for her and my brother, James Kessler. Without saying a word, I walked straight to my room. When I opened the door, I found it filled with clutter, and none of my belongings were in sight. Turning to Melanie, I asked, "Mom, what happened here?" She hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "You've been gone for so long, and the house is small with lots of stuff, so we stored everything in your room." "And my things?" I pressed. Melanie looked down. Her guilt was evident. "Sold or thrown away. They're all gone." My heart sank again. "Mom, I was in prison, not dead. Was it necessary to clear out all my things?" When my father, Seamus Kessler, heard this from the sofa, he casually said, "Nina, Greta is 5 months pregnant and needs space for baby stuff. The house is cramped. Your things weren't needed anymore, so we got rid of them." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. My father used to love organizing my things, saying he wanted to create a collection of my most meaningful belongings to give me as a wedding gift someday. Why didn't he care that they were all gone now? "Where am I supposed to stay?" I asked. Melanie pulled out $200 and tossed it on the table carelessly as if she were giving money to a beggar. "Here, take this. Find a motel or rent a place. It's up to you." I forced a bitter smile. "What about James? Does he feel the same way?" Just then, my brother, James Kessler, emerged from the bathroom. Without hesitation, he said, "Nina, you're my sister. Of course, I'm on your side. If you want to stay here, I'll clear the room for you." It seemed James still cared about me. I nodded with relief. "All right, I'll stay for a while." But as soon as I said that, James' expression froze. He stood there, looking at me, but made no move to clean the room. I stared back, puzzled. At this time, Greta walked up to me, her voice sharp. "Janina, have you lost your mind in prison? How can you be so inconsiderate? Can't you see how cramped the house is? Even if we clear out the room, it should be for the baby. You're an adult now. How can you shamelessly insist on staying here? Have some sense." I felt sorrowful and replied hoarsely, "Greta, this is my home. Isn't it normal for me to stay for a few days?" "Your home? This house is under James' name now. He's married, and you're 30 years old. How can you still want to live with your brother?" Her disdain was no longer hidden, her eyes filled with contempt. I looked at James. He pressed his lips together, looking everywhere but at me. I turned to my mother, but she just stared back, her expression dark, offering no support. My father puffed away on his cigarette, acting as if none of this concerned him. There I stood, awkward and helpless, realizing their rush to property transfer wasn't just to avoid a potential dispute. They wanted to use it as an excuse to kick me out. My heart ached with 1,000 tiny stings. Looking at my family, I asked incredulously, "Did I do something wrong? Why have you all changed so suddenly?" For the first time, I felt like an outsider in my own home. Before I went to prison, everyone treated me well. Why had everything changed the moment I was released? Without hesitation, Greta responded, "Janina, before, you could make money and support the family, so we all got along. But now, you're just an ex-con. Finding a decent job or a husband will be nearly impossible. In your situation, what can you do but leech off us? Why should we still treat you well?" My heart sank, and I asked painfully, "So, because I'm no longer useful and might be a burden, you don't care about me anymore?" "Nina, it's not our fault." Melanie looked at me and finally said, "Another mouth to feed isn't something we can afford. You're better off finding a place to rent and taking care of yourself instead of being a burden to us." "I'm a burden?" I looked at Melanie with a pained expression. "Mom, you were the ones who begged me in tears to take the fall for James. You said if I did, I'd be the savior of this family, and you'd repay me no matter what. Now, I just got out and haven't even had a sip of water at home, and suddenly, I'm a burden? I've given so much for this family. I handed over all my wages, contributed to buying this house, and even served 2 years in prison for James. Doesn't that entitle me to a room in my own home? My voice was hoarse, and I felt utterly wronged. James said, Nina, I know you're upset, but do you think it was easy for us these past 2 years? Having a convict in the family brought shame on all of us. People point and whisper wherever we go. Who knows what people will say about us if you stay here? Can't you think about us for once? The brother I sacrificed everything to protect finally revealed his true feelings. To him, I was now just a burden, the reason for their shame. All my sacrifices were reduced to a joke. I looked at him with deep disappointment and said coldly, James Kessler, don't forget, the one who should have been a convict is you. The one who shamed the family is you. If you really cared about the family's reputation, you should have confessed from the start. Instead, you let me take the fall, and now you have the audacity to blame me for not thinking about you. I took the fall for my brother and spent 2 years in jail. But when I got out of jail, my brother and sister-in-law were worried that I would compete for the property and join my parents in trying to kick me out of the house. 2 years ago, James and Greta were speeding and driving in the wrong direction with my car when they hit and killed someone. My parents came to me immediately. They said James had a weak heart and had finally managed to get married. If he went to prison, not only would he lose his marriage, but his life might be at risk. They cried and begged me to take the blame for him. They promised that the whole family would repay me generously once I got out. I didn't do it for any reward. I did it out of love for my parents and genuine care for my brother. I sacrificed myself, went to prison for him, sold my car, drained my savings, lost my job, paid the compensation, and endured all the insults. But I never expected my wholehearted sacrifice to be met with utter betrayal and contempt. I don't understand. Isn't blood supposed to be thicker than water? Why does family loyalty become so insignificant when faced with personal gain? James heard my words, and his face turned dark with displeasure. He retorted, I've already thanked you for taking the fall. What more do you want from me? This house is under my name now, and Greta will give birth in a few months. There's not enough room. You need to move out. We can't afford to support an idler. In his eyes, 2 years in prison for him was worth only a single thank you. Asking for more made me the unreasonable one. Melanie chimed in, Nina, don't you get it? A woman's fate is to marry and have children, not live off her family. We were hoping to marry you off to a good man and get some money, but now, as an ex-convict, no one will want you. Letting you stay here is already us considering old time's sake. Greta added, exactly. You've been to prison, so you'll be poor forever. If we let you stay, you drain us dry. Greta rubbed her belly and spoke mercilessly. Seamus put out his cigarette and said coldly, Janina, you're grown up now. It's time you understood the importance of contributing to the family instead of causing trouble. Each of their words felt like a sharp knife piercing my heart. Despite my overwhelming disappointment, my eyes welled up. I looked at them and said hoarsely, no wonder you never visited me once during my 2 years in prison. I thought you were just too busy to see me. But now I see you only saw me as a moneymaker. You kicked me to the curb without hesitation the moment I couldn't make money anymore. I tilted my head back, fighting to hold back my tears. Then, I asked, so you're all determined to kick me out today? Yes. Seamus replied without hesitation. Melanie, James, and Greta all looked equally resolute. Clearly, there was no room for negotiation. I saw no trace of affection in their eyes. I nodded, my heart completely broken. Fine, as you wish. From today, we're done. And I hope you won't regret it. I finally saw them for what they were. These people I'd longed for during my 2 years in prison didn't deserve my sacrifices. The $100 million I had planned to share with them would now remain with me. Without another word, I walked out the door, not looking back. Behind the door, I heard Greta's resentful roar, you think too highly of yourself. What's there to regret to cut ties with a broke ex-convict like you? If we let you stay here and mooch off us, that's when we'd really regret it. Leaving that heartless home, I wandered the streets alone for a long time before finally finding a hotel to stay in. Lying on the bed, I stared at the 9-figure balance in my bank account, lost in thought. I used to believe I lived in a very happy family. My father patiently comforted and advised me when I faced difficulties at work. My mother would bring my favorite soup to my office when I worked late. My brother would come to pick me up from work when it rained. I felt like the cherished little princess of the family. I was always puzzled whenever I saw stories online about parents favoring sons over daughters. How could such families exist? How could parents not love their daughters? But now, I finally grasped that awful feeling of helplessness and disappointment. I realized I had always been part of such a family. All the love I had felt was conditional, based on my usefulness. To them, I was more like an investment. Their love was the cost, and my money was the return. So, the gifts of fate had always come with a hidden price. When I could make money and ensure a comfortable life for everyone, they smiled warmly at me. But now, they saw me as an ex-convict who couldn't find a job, with no money and no value. Their love had vanished completely. Little did they know, this ex-con had $100 million in her account. I couldn't help but feel a bit excited, wondering how they'd react when the daughter they despised most stood at the pinnacle of success one day. The next day, I arrived at a hotel in the city center. This wasn't just any hotel. It was a top-notch, sprawling establishment that catered to dining, lodging, banquets, and even business activities. It had 8 floors and occupied an entire building. The location, surroundings, and foot traffic were all excellent. Before I went to prison, I worked as a hotel lobby manager. Naturally, I wanted to return to my old profession. Only this time, not as a manager but as the owner. I negotiated with the hotel's owner for several hours and eventually bought the hotel from him. I took over management that very day. From then on, I lived and ate at the hotel, seizing every moment to learn and develop new management and operational strategies. Under my leadership, the hotel's business flourished, becoming so popular that it was almost impossible to get a reservation. I soon became a bona fide wealthy woman in the city. One evening, 6 months later, while inspecting the dining department, I overheard James in a private room. "This hotel is so popular. I had to book my son's 1-month celebration 2 months in advance just to get a table. I've heard that only the creme de la creme get to dine here. James, you made it, bringing us to such a lavish place." I froze in place and realized James had brought our parents and a bunch of relatives to this private room for his newborn son's 1-month celebration. Melanie was busy showing off by recording videos on her phone. My face appeared in the frame when her camera panned to the door. "Janina? What are you doing here?" Melanie put down her phone and frowned at me. Upon hearing this, everyone in the room turned their gaze towards me, standing at the doorway. "Janina, have you no shame? You knew we were having a banquet here today and followed us just to scrounge a meal." Greta rushed over and scolded me as if I were the plague. "Who said I was here to scrounge for food?" I replied calmly. "What are you here for if you're not here to scrounge? Begging? This is a high-end place reserved for the wealthy. If you're hungry, go dig through the trash outside. That's where you belong," she said, crossing her arms and looking at me with utter disdain. The other relatives also frowned and glared at me, their expressions filled with disgust as if I were an annoying fly. James spoke up, too, clearly unhappy. "Janina, when you said you wanted to cut ties with us, I thought you had some backbone. But now, you've stooped to follow us for a free meal. It's really disgusting." Before I could respond, Seamus chimed in. "Janina, I taught you from a young age to be self-reliant and have some backbone. Have you forgotten? How could you throw away your dignity for a meal?" I looked at them and sneered. "It's just a meal. It doesn't matter to me. You're really something, aren't you? Sour grapes, huh? As if you, a penniless ex-con, could ever afford a meal here even if you worked your whole life," Greta sneered. "I took the fall for my brother and spent 2 years in jail, but when I got out of jail my brother and sister-in-law were worried that I would compete for the property. They joined my parents in trying to kick me out of the house, but they didn't know that inside the prison I accidentally saved the daughter of the richest man in town. To show his gratitude, he gave me $100 million after my release. The first thing I did was try to go home and surprise them. You're just putting on a brave face now that you see we're not welcoming you, pretending you don't care," Greta continued her snide remarks. Melanie also looked at me with disdain. "Janina, you need to know your place. This isn't somewhere you belong. Just leave and stop embarrassing yourself." "Exactly. Today is my son's 1-month celebration. Your presence here will only bring bad luck to him. I don't want my son to be poor his whole life. Get out." Greta's hostility was relentless. I met her gaze and said coldly, "If you don't want to see me, you can leave yourself." This was my territory, and I had no intention of indulging her. "Well, aren't you something, Janina? No skills but plenty of attitude. This high-end hotel is no place for a broke ex-con like you. Get out, get out, get out." Greta was furious, grabbing my collar and trying to drag me out. "Don't touch me." I forcefully shrugged off her hand, causing her to stumble and nearly fall. Smack! Without a word, James stepped forward and slapped me hard across the face. "Janina, you're no longer the lobby manager earning tens of thousands a month. Now, you're just a worthless nobody. Did you really think we'd put up with you?" He then shouted down the hallway. "Security! Where's security?" Hearing this, a group of security guards quickly rushed over. James pointed at me and barked at the security guards. "How can you let just anyone in here? Get this beggar woman out of here immediately." The head of security approached James and asked politely, "Sir, what is the problem?" James pointed at me again. "This woman is a penniless beggar trying to scrounge a meal here. Get her out." The security chief looked at me and said coldly, "Ma'am, please leave." I usually kept a low profile, rarely revealing my status as the hotel owner, even though I lived and dined here. Only the upper management knew who I was. Seeing the head of security try to throw me out so quickly, I fixed him with a stern gaze and said, "Is this how you handle situations? Don't you know the hotel's policy? We should not judge anyone by their appearance or offend any guest." A flicker of uncertainty crossed the security chief's eyes. He looked at me uneasily, no longer daring to say anything. Greta, seeing this, became anxious. "Don't let her fool you. She's just a broke ex-con. Throw her out." "Sorry, ma'am. We don't eject any guests without cause." The security chief firmly refused Greta's demand this time. "What are you security guys doing then? Getting scared off by a few words from her?" James shouted at the guards, then turned to me again. "Janina, don't think you can bluff your way out of this. I know the hotel manager here. One call from me, and you're out." With that, he pulled out his phone and made a call. Mr. Feldman, it's James. I'm busy. The call ended abruptly with a cold response, leaving James standing awkwardly with his phone. I sneered and said calmly, "You want to speak to Mr. Feldman? Let me help you." I took out my phone and called, "Mr. Feldman, come to private room 777 within 3 minutes. Janina, are you out of your mind? You're a broke ex-con. Don't pretend to be someone important here. We know exactly what kind of person you are. Is there any need to put on this act?" James sneered at me. The other relatives looked at me like I was a clown, their faces filled with mockery and disgust. Melanie wiped the sweat from her forehead and said in embarrassment, "This is so humiliating. How did I raise a daughter like this?" Seamus also looked exasperated. "Janina, just leave. Stop pretending. You're making a fool of yourself and your family." "Exactly. Some people are so poor they've lost their minds and developed delusions. James couldn't even get Mr. Feldman here and you think you can? It's ridiculous." Greta scoffed, her tone dripping with contempt. She looked at me as if even acknowledging my existence was beneath her. But just as she finished speaking, a middle-aged man in a suit arrived at our side.